hardships I endured in this journeying business were long to tell. Peril and privation, storms and frost which often overtook me. By the unfailing grace of God our Lord, I came forth from all. Álvaro Núñez, Cabeza de Vaca.
On a cold morning in the autumn of 1528, 30 years after Christopher Columbus first landed in the New World, a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico blew a frail boat onto the coast of Galveston Island in what is now Texas. A handful of Spanish soldiers staggered ashore. They were the first Europeans to set foot in the West. One of the shipwreck survivors was a nobleman named Álvaro Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, a hardened veteran of half a dozen wars against the enemies of Spain. Spain had already conquered most of South America, Central America, and all of Mexico, converting thousands of Indians to Christ and stripping the Aztec and Incan cultures of their enormous wealth. Now, Cabeza de Vaca's expedition was probing north in search of even greater treasure. "We came here to serve God and His Majesty," one conquistador wrote, "to give light to those who were in darkness and to get rich, as all men desire to do." Cabeza de Vaca and his men were fed and housed by the coastal Cocos Indians, who believed the strangers to have magical powers. But when dysentery, carried by the Spanish, killed almost half the tribe, the Indians turned on the soldiers. Cabeza de Vaca and his companions had hoped to come as conquerors. Instead, they entered the West as captives.
My life became unbearable. In addition to much other work, I had to grub roots in the water or from the underground in the cane brakes. My fingers got so raw that if a straw touched them, they would bleed. The broken canes often slashed my flesh.
After 2 years of misery, Cabeza de Vaca fled his captors. He began trading, carrying shells and mesquite fruit to the tribes of the interior, and bringing back to the coastal tribes furs, flint for arrowheads, and red ochre for face painting. Because he belonged to no tribe himself, he was welcomed wherever he went. By the summer of 1534, Cabeza de Vaca and the 3 remaining survivors of the expedition decided to try to make their way to Mexico City. They wandered on foot for 2 years, through Texas, across the Rio Grande, moving from one tribe to the next.
Some Indians came begging us to cure them of terrible headaches. Surely extraordinary men like us, they said, embodied powers over nature. When we made the sign of the cross over them and commended them to God, they instantly said all pain had vanished and gave us prickly pears and chunks of venison.
Soon, Cabeza de Vaca and his companions found themselves escorted from village to village by an army of some 600 admiring Indians. If they were to be converted to Christianity, Cabeza de Vaca had come to believe, they must be won by kindness, the only certain way.
He becomes a curer. He becomes a healer. He becomes an emissary of God. And Cabeza de Vaca becomes, in effect, a leader of Indian peoples. He moves through the Southwest, trudging through the desert from community to community. And then the dream stops.
In the spring of 1536, Cabeza de Vaca and hundreds of Indians finally entered Mexico and came upon a column of Spanish soldiers who had come north, destroying crops, looting villages, seizing slaves.
With heavy hearts, we looked out over the once lavishly watered, fertile, and beautiful land. now abandoned and burned, and the people thin and weak, scattering and hiding in fright.
Cabeza de Vaca's Indian followers were confused. How could he and these Spaniards belong to the same people? Cabeza de Vaca healed the sick. They killed the healthy. He wanted nothing. They took everything. Sure that the Spanish would enslave his Indian escorts, Cabeza de Vaca urged them to flee. Then he set out again for Mexico City. As soon as he was gone, the Spanish seized many of his Indian friends.
Cabeza de Vaca's journey through this extraordinary world ends up in a very ordinary world, a world of Spanish slavers and Indian victims. But in between, in that moment, there was a vision of how something else might have happened that never would really fully happen, but would appear in glimpses again and again as Indians and whites interacted in the continent.